Hi, I'm Cheryl,
I'm Dan, and welcome to our podcast.
where we're talking to real people about real problems in real situations.
Grab a cuppa while we talk founder life. Hi, and welcome to today's episode. Today we've got Dave from Assist Consulting, where we're going to be talking about how running a successful business and a successful team is all around the art of communication. Hi Dave, thank you for joining us. If you want to start with just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Dave Snowling. I'm 63. I've only ever really worked in the joinery industry, so I'm a bit of a wood person. So I left school at 16 without any qualifications that were worth talking about, apart from art and woodwork. They were the two subjects that I excelled in. I joined a company at 16, became an apprentice, which in the old days was the good old city and guilds. So I did a 3-year apprenticeship, which was day release. And I worked for that company for 23 years and eventually took voluntary redundancy. And then I joined a much smaller business, because the business that I worked for was the largest joinery company in the UK. So 9 factories, turned over 164-ish million, I suppose. My factory was the smallest. I had a mere 180 employees working for me. So I started off on the tools, and I worked my way through supervision and mid-management to the director general manager, and ran the site. Had the wonderful job of closing the site in 1987. So made all of those people redundant. Carried on working for the business for a couple of 3 years, doing troubleshooting and setting up after sales and installation for that business, which is when I took voluntary redundancy at the end of that period, and then went to a much smaller family business that turned over considerably less. Only had 26 employees working for me when I moved, and I worked for that business for 11 years and built it up to approximately 120 people. And since that time, 2010, 2011, I've worked for myself. So I call my business Assist Consulting, and it's fair to say that I work in the joinery timber sector because that's where my expertise are from. And I've been doing that now for 12 years.
Fantastic. So that's quite a journey, and obviously managed quite a few people over that time. What kind of was your consulting now? So what was the driving factor towards kind of going down the consulting route?
If I'm honest, I probably reached a stage in my life where managing people was in itself a full-time job. Looking after customers and customer complaints is a kind of a full-time job. And I suppose I got to a point where I wanted to relieve myself of those stresses and pressures. I'd always fancied working for myself, and I felt I had value and could offer businesses that couldn't necessarily support or justify the wage that I would cost them. If I were to work for them 1 day a week, 1 day a month, whatever it might be, that's where I thought that I might be able to add value to businesses. So, within the company that I worked, we won several technology awards for some of the things that we've done. So, some people joke in our industry that we're a bit dinosaur. We have machinery that is 50, 60, 70 years old, and we're still making doors and windows on those. So I developed with my team ways to do things differently. Bring it up to the 20th century. Yeah, so I can offer businesses that don't perhaps have that knowledge or expertise support and help.
How have you found that transition from employment to self-employment? And
to start with, it's quite difficult because I'd always had a secretary I'm reasonable at creating spreadsheets. I mean, all the businesses that I've worked in, every system that the business had was probably generated by Snowling. So I was reasonable at spreadsheets when spreadsheets had only just come in and a lot of people didn't really know how to or what you could do with them. But the secretarial side of things, I think I probably was dyslexic at school. That's probably why I didn't do so well. So writing a letter to somebody, for example, I could have a dictaphone, and I'm pretty good on those, but they're pretty old-fashioned now. But and it would come back, and I think, how did I dictate that letter? So I find that a little bit. I found that very strange to start with, creating my own reports, creating my own minutes for meetings. I'm quite confident about sitting down with a group of people and following an agenda and then trying to work that team to a goal that they want to achieve. But in terms of then sitting down in front of a PC and getting up a Word document, if it's Excel, brilliant. If it's Word, it's something that I've had to learn, but I'm reasonable at that now, I think. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it?
I sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I found that when you go from that employment to running your own business, it's all the things you don't think of that are actually the challenges, not actually doing the job or finding the customers. It's that back end office stuff, isn't it? It's the stuff we don't learn, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I think that was the hardest thing for me to adjust. And then I've always had a lot of people around me. I've always had not necessarily people go and say, Dave, what are we going to do next? Dave, what is this? Dave, what is that? I've been very used to having a lot of people around me. And I'm not supporting all of those people. Those people are 9 times out of 10 might be supporting me. It's a team effort. I've always worked in that type of environment. I like to develop teams. I like to develop relationships, and if you do well, it's not just the fact that, he's the manager, he should get the hat with the star on. It's the team. So when you go on your own, I suppose you could say it's quite lonely to start with.
Yeah. No, it definitely can be, and I think a lot of business owners kind of experience that on the transition. It can get like that.
Yeah,
it can. How did you find kind of going from managing 100 odd people to just kind of managing yourself, really?
It is lonely. It's the buzz of hitting a number. It's the buzz of hitting a target. It's the buzz goes out of your life a little bit. I was also made it harder for me was I was actually put on garden leave for 6 months. So I had 3 months where I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody within my industry, and then I had a further 3 months where I wasn't allowed to talk to 5 of our main competitors. So I had a 6-month period where you go from getting in the car at 6 o'clock in the morning, coming home at 6 o'clock at night, thinking numbers and people and customers all the time, and then suddenly nothing. And that first 6 months was difficult. There's only so much time you can devote to thinking, well, I'm going to have a list of people that I'm going to contact. That's half a day's work. I'll create my terms and conditions. That's another half a day's work. So it's hobbies.
Was that enforced because you were starting up on your own, or was that just the general clause in your contract?
I was a director of the business. I was a percentage shareholder, and that was part of the deal. So obviously it was something I agreed to. It was something that was in the closing package that I left that business. Yeah. It wasn't imposed upon me. It was something I agreed to, and that was reflected in the package that I was offered.
Okay. So you said, so one of the interesting things that you kind of said as well is that you went from managing people and the kind of their issues and that like takes up most of the time. What type of things were you having to deal with to manage a team of that size?
It could be anything really. It could be that you don't have any issues for 6 months, and then for whatever reason, two people, I mean, I had 45% of my workforce were from Poland, so that in itself is a little bit different. You've got a communication problem to start with when they come over, so I addressed that by the agency that I used. They had a very good guy who could speak many different languages, and we used him to help with any communication problems. But in the same way, in our country, sometimes people that come from Scotland don't always get on with people that come from England, and people that come from Wales don't always get on with people that come from England. And when you employ some people from Poland, me naively thought all the Polish people will like each other, but you do have a north-south divide within Poland. And then suddenly you've got 45, 50 people that have come from another country that don't necessarily speak English very well, and one or two of them have a problem with each other. And the way in which they sort their problems out are not as diplomatic as we might do in this country. So
do we sort that diplomatically?
so you could have those problems. You could have language problems. You could have personality clashes. Numerous problems, quality issues, output issues, so are people being productive or not, timekeeping issues, and then all the things that we know about, the family related issues that mean somebody can't come to work for whatever period of time, always try and work with those people. But then it's another issue to deal with. While you're dealing with that, you're not actually dealing with, well, it is part of your job, but you're not actually dealing with, I need to get this out this month or this week or today. So every day was different.
Which is important, isn't it? When you're taking on a role like that, you need variety.
Yeah, it's like when you have I can't think of an analogy, but for example, you've got a hole in your roof, and you get a guy and you pay him $2,500. He repairs your roof and off he goes. But does your house look any different? No. You've lost all the time that it took you to earn $2,500. And if you have an issue like, two guys decide or two girls or a guy and a girl, it doesn't really matter. They decide that they're going to have a fight. Well, that in itself is going to be my day almost gone, because by the time I sit down and interview them, I then suspend them with full pay. And then off they go, and I carry out an investigation, and I invite them back for a disciplinary meeting. And you go through the disciplinary meeting, and you might summary dismiss them, and then they appeal, and off they go to the director for the appeal hearing. It's a bit like the hole in the roof. I didn't actually expect to do this repair today. What I expected to do was get on with my work. That's something that suddenly lands on your desk.
The joys of being a manager, I suppose.
Is that something you had to deal with? I mean, you said it comes up every 6 months or something, but it sounds like you had quite a process in place for dealing with those sort of things.
I mean,
is that from experience, or is that?
Well, when I worked at Cars, we had our own HR department, which was based in Sheffield, and my factory was in Silver End. So it was 176 miles away, and we didn't have things like we are doing here today. The best means of communication was on a telephone. So you always had the support of HR in Sheffield, who would talk you through whatever scenario you were heading towards before you actually got to that point. So if you had a problem, you could phone up HR, say, look, I've got this problem, and they'd give you some advice on how you might deal with it. They were also pretty good at pulling people in. So if you're a mid-manager and you're dealing with these type of things, they would call you to Sheffield, and you'd have like a 1 or 2 or 3 day training course to cover certain things. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, the training courses that they put you through and videoed whilst you were doing it were probably more stressful than dealing with the real thing. because they would. I'll give you an example. I was called to Sheffield to do a training exercise on how to deal with issues. And the brief they gave me was I was going to deal with this person who worked in my factory who had a body odour problem. So that was basically all I was told. The person who had the body odour problem, they told him he had a medical condition and his glands didn't work properly. So when I sat down and was being recorded, I was sort of going to, in my mind, I was going to talk about general hygiene and this and that and deodorants and soaps and blah, blah, blah. And then he came out with this bombshell. I can't actually help it because my glands don't work properly. And then you're sitting there looking at the camera going, oh, what are we going to do next? So, and I still remember that to today. And that's probably, 30, 40 years ago. But so there was, at John Carr's, there was good backup, good help. When I went to Mumford and Wood, they didn't have an HR department because it was a total business of 34 people. I think when I first went there, 26 on the shop floor. So what I did was I used a company called Park City Consulting. And Park City Consulting offer HR and health and safety support. It doesn't mean that you can throw your hands up in the air and you suddenly have no liability in that respect. Well, what they did was they offered me the support that HR offered me when I worked for the bigger company. So I could phone up Park City and I could talk through whatever it was. And they came in. When I was at John Carr's, we used ACAS to create our own works handbook. So we came up with a constitution because we didn't recognise unions at John Carr's. So we came up with a constitution and we had elected representatives from the shop floor and we called that a work committee. So the management would sit down with the work committee and then we would communicate that back to the factory. When I went to Mumford and Wood, they didn't have such thing as a works handbook or anything like that. So we used Park City and we made sure that our works handbook complied with the law, and Park City would come in every other month and audit different aspects of that process. And they would also do the same on health and safety. So we would write the health and safety booklet up. And then, for example, they'd come in and they'd audit me on, equal rights or numerous things, Pros. Numerous. Well, I called you Pros then. Sorry.
All right, don't worry. I've been called worse.
His name's Daniel. I've only ever known you as Pros, so I can only ever call you.
No, that's fine. Don't worry about it. I've been called worse. So it's fair to say from that, no matter how much support that you got in, and say, when you're running Mumford and Wood and a growing team, you outsourced it and got it in. But no matter how much support you got in, the most valuable thing to you was what you learned from the experience of dealing with the situation.
Yeah, I think John Carr's was, for all of its, some people, if you said John Carr's, they would class that as a low quality product, a mass producer, and perhaps the training there was not so great. But I would say that John Carr's for me was a fantastic education. I left school when I was 16. I didn't really, as I said earlier, I didn't really have a qualification as such, but in that 23 years, I learned an awful lot. I understood maths better as an apprentice wood machinist than I did when I did maths when I was at secondary school. I never been, computers weren't really around when I was at school, to be honest. So, when I was at John Carr's and a supervisor, hey presto, a computer ended up in my office and they said, that's a computer, that's how you turn it on, that's a spreadsheet. And everything I learned to do on spreadsheets, I learned myself. I mean, that's unfair. I did actually, they sent me to, it was called an ISM qualification. So I did a 1 year, 2 evenings a week Institute of Supervisory Management course, which I passed, and then I went on to do the diploma. So they taught us to do some different things on spreadsheets, and they also taught HR and all those types of things. And then there was residential weekends away to Wales and, put you through stressful situations like abseil down a cliff, and I don't like heights, going and finding a bomb that was underground, and I don't like going into confined spaces. So they put you into all those sort of situations that you have to do it. Well, you don't have to do it, you can fail. But what they said was, on that particular course, you are a team of 6 people, and there were 3 teams. As long as one person in each team does it, you will pass the course. So it's geared at trying to communicate with each other, and I had one guy who was against his religion to do anything, and there were 2 women who were in their 50s who flatly refused to do everything. So Muggins ended up doing most of it.
That's interesting, actually. So you say Muggins ended up doing most of it, but that's obviously, there's quite a desire there then to lead by example, and like, I will, if called upon, I will stand up and I will do it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I can remember when I went to Mumford. I went into Mumford, and the lad who was the manager there suddenly had been stepped over the top, and I went in there as the works manager. So he kind of took it as he'd been demoted. He hadn't been demoted. And I made it my business to make sure that he felt valued, and I was there to support and perhaps develop him. So what he should never do in in the future was let somebody step over the top of him again, because I would help him to do the job that he needed to do better. And after about, I think it was within 9 months, they'd never had appraisals there. So I introduced appraisals because that's what I used to do. I did my appraisals, and this manager sat down and he said to me, I've only actually known you for 9 months. He said, and I've worked for John for however many years it was, 20 years. He said, but if we went into battle, he said, and you said, right, we're going this way, I would follow you, and I wouldn't follow the people that I've worked for 20 or something years. So I like to build on relationships. I detest people who dictate.
Yeah, it's leading, isn't it? Leading by example, but generally leading your team and building.
I'm probably quite a strong leader. Most people that have worked for me that haven't known my past think I'm military, because I love systems, I love order, I like the rules, I like all of those things. But it doesn't mean to say that I don't like having a laugh, because if you can't laugh, then why you spend more time at work than you do with your wife. So it should be fun. So we go to work and we should have fun. But what we shouldn't do is break the rules or deviate from what it is that we put down, that we say what we're going to do. Doesn't mean to say we can't change it. We can review it and change it, but until we actually say this is what we're going to do differently, we carry on doing it the way we say we're going to do it. And in my working life, I just love changing things, always looking for how to do it better. Yeah.
I guess from that, then, it was a natural step to your consultancy business, because you're going in and helping other businesses to become better.
That's what I try and do. I have different customers. My biggest customer is a supplier of timber. And what I do with that is I support them by going into joinery companies and training them how to use this different type of timber. So it's very training orientated. But I've always come from the trade, so I can talk their language. So, when you start talking about scribes, to most people, a scribe doesn't mean anything, and then you talk about a comb joint. Well, what's a comb joint? Does it look like a comb? or so if you go in and you talk to a joinery company, you've got to talk the lingo. So that's training. Then there are other people that I see. I do a bit of mentoring, a bit like the manager I spoke about, who I sort of took on at Mumford. I do mentoring, so I help managers that perhaps need to strengthen certain skills, and I also help businesses. So there's 1 or 2 businesses that I've worked with, especially one in London. I'm quite proud of them. They're doing really, really well. But no, go in, and the first thing I generally do is I call it a business review. So I go in and I look at what they do from the moment they take an inquiry to the point that they send the final invoice out for installing the product. And then I look at that whole process and come up with what I think is changes that they might make in terms of their systems, their machines, their people, their means of communication, whatever it is. So from one day you can get, I believe, whatever size of business, you can get a good feel for what they do or don't do well.
Interesting.
I love a process.
we know you like a process. But it's important, isn't it? I think with anything, if you're trying to improve something, you need something in place already. You can't. It's easy to improve it when you haven't got a process, but at least having something to adhere to makes it.
Well, even if you
at least something to work with.
I think it's always good to come up, to the people who just sort of sit and do the same thing every day. Never really go anywhere apart from what they do today. It doesn't matter if you come up with 8 ideas or come up with 10 ideas and 8 of them don't work. 2 of them might, and they might make significant changes to what you do. So I like to challenge what it is that you do and how you do it. And a lot of
And do you think that's part?
Yeah, a lot of businesses that I see, they don't. We always used to say, meetings, bloody meetings. Don't hold a meeting just for the sake of holding a meeting. But I am a believer in, I used to have a production meeting once a week. It doesn't mean to say that it's going to be a boring old meeting and it's going to last 3 hours, or it could last 10 minutes. We had an agenda and we would follow the agenda. There would be notes that went out after the meeting had finished. People would be a portion to whatever it was. Point 1 was somebody and a target date, and we'd all agree what that target date was going to be and who was going to be the person who took that. So a lot of businesses I go and see, they say they're going to do things, but if you went back 3 months later, they're still saying they're going to do it. They don't take the time to just pull themselves back from the business, look at it as what it is that they wanted to achieve. Have they achieved it? Have they achieved 50% of it? Have they even done anything to it since they talked about it 3 months ago? So a lot of the time it's just, it's not a spreadsheet I have, but when I have businesses that I work for, I agree with them an agenda, and then whether I see them once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once every half year, whatever it is, we will go back to those minutes of the previous meeting and what have we done. And once I've started working with somebody, they know that next time I come in, that bloke's going to ask me, have I done that? So it just pushes the business on. Yeah.
It's having somebody accountable as well, isn't it? Because one of the things, as you said, as a business owner, it's lonely and you haven't got anyone holding you accountable, which is why I think mentoring, consultancy, coaching, all of those sort of type of things and roles are so important for business owners to have somebody there to keep you going forward.
Yes. Yeah.
Is the most successful? So you said there's one business in London that I'm proud of. Is it the ones that you most consistently deal with are the ones that will take on criticism and they'll take it? There won't be an excuse or an answer for it, and they'll kind of look towards implementing what you're doing straight away. Are they the ones that kind of thrive and move on, grow the most aggressive, or is it maybe some people combative at first, but then maybe see the error of their ways? What would you say the
I think the
most successful ones are?
It depends how open-minded the person is who owns the business. There are businesses that I work with that I can make suggestions, but at the end of the day, I don't work there 24/7. So you can make suggestions, and everybody goes, "Hey, that's a good idea," And as soon as you walk out the door, they carry on doing what they were doing before you went in. Those ones you have to chip away at quite slowly, because you try and sort of crack a nut with a sledgehammer, and all you do is smash it to smithereens, and they perhaps don't want to talk to you anymore. But the businesses that want to change will. And the particular business I'm talking about, the father of that business is a father and two sons. The father of that business did not want me to go in. He was dead against it. But the sons thought it was a good idea. 6 months later, the father said, it was one of the best things we ever did was getting that guy in. And, he changed his mind. And I think he would actually openly say to people that visited them now that I did add value to it and I did change some of the things that they do. Yeah. I still work with that company occasionally, but I worked with that company quite closely for perhaps 2 years, I suppose, but it was only one day a month. And then you're available on the phone to talk about things, because my working life is 2 or 3 days I might be in the car. So if you're traveling 250 miles in a day and you're talking to 3 or 4 different companies, then you're also sitting in a car and you're available to talk to people if they want to call you and discuss something. So they still, I tease them and say, I know if it's them because it comes up on my phone, it's blah, blah, blah. And I always answer the phone by saying Dave Snowling Free Consultancy, because now we have a different type of relationship, I suppose, and they will pick my brains for something. But then I know if they've got a project, they'll say, Dave, could you look at this for us? And it might be 2 days consultancy, or it might be 4 hours of work, and I email them what I think. So it's a good relationship now.
Well, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Is sometimes you can get so stuck in your ways, so engrossed in your business, you need somebody from the outside looking in to actually challenge you to see that there are other options as well, because you just can't see it, can you? And it sounds like that's what's happened here.
And when I worked, when I worked as an employed person, we were looking, when I was involved in sort of a director owner of the business, we were looking to make acquisitions of other companies. So it wasn't something I did every month, but I would actually go on behalf of our board of directors to look at other businesses that we might consider acquiring. So it was something that I kind of did before I do what I do now. Obviously, I don't go out and look to acquire. I go out and look and see how they might improve, which I suppose would add value if they were to decide to exit.
Check out Xero today at xero.com. That's Xero with an X, xero.com.
An interesting thing that you've said a few times now, which is you said that, when you came on, you mentored that person, you gave them time. You've also said there about when people call, you're happy to give them time. Do you think giving people time is an important aspect of building these lasting relationships and then implementing and taking on board some of your suggestions?
Definitely, yeah. Communication, in my opinion, is one of the best tools that we have. I'm not a lover of emails, if I'm honest. I'm not a lover of WhatsApp, Facebook, any of those things. I would much rather, if I have to, I'd rather talk to somebody on the phone. But what I like doing most is talking to people face to face. Yeah.
And it's important, isn't it? We all have our own way of working and what works best for that individual.
Yeah.
Especially in the industries that you work in, that works better, doesn't it?
Sorry, say that again.
Especially in these sort of industries that you deal with.
Yes.
In the sort of industries that you deal with, that works better, wouldn't it? So.
Yes. I always used to have an expression, though, and I don't know really where I got it from, but my style of management is management by walking around. Because, I could walk. I used to make it my business. As soon as I arrived at work, the first thing I would do is take my coat off, and then I would go around and say good morning to everybody. And I would also do that straight after lunch. So regardless to what my calendar was, I would always go and say hello to everybody. And people skills and understanding people's emotions, whether it's facial, speech or whatever it might be, I'd walk around and say hello to everybody. I knew all by name. In a lot of cases, I knew their wives' names or husbands' names. I knew their children. And then when I used to sit down at 10 o'clock with my production manager, he'd always come up to me at 10 o'clock and we'd talk about what it was that we had achieved the previous day, what it was that we needed to achieve today and for the rest of the month, week and month. But then I'd say to him, what's the matter with Fred today? And he'd say, well, why do you say that? What do you think's wrong with him? I said, well, I just know from going around this morning, he's not himself. But he didn't have that people skill. It went straight over his head. But I would kind of almost not provoke it, but I would sort of then ask a question, you know, you okay? Everything all right? You know, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't, that's why I quite like the management by walking around. If you don't walk around and you don't see somebody's expression, it's a bit like an email. An email, you don't see their expression. A text, you don't see their expression, and quite often you can interpret it to mean something that it doesn't. Whereas if you're talking to somebody and you see their expression and you hear what they're saying, for me, that's a much better means of communication. And I say that right from the top of a business all the way down. Everybody's the same, but I think I get better value by seeing people face to face.
Is that something you also see in some of the companies that you consult for, like the ones that are more successful? You see that they are companies that kind of they take an interest and time in their employees and what's going on, and is that sometimes what you suggest when you mentor people, that you need to be interested in the people that work for you?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's something that I always push. You know, you should really work towards improving communications because it pays back dividends. You know, it's something you must do if you really want your business to do well. Then your communications have got to be good. I mean, I was dead against it. I mean, when I first was a supervisor, you know, the thought of stopping my production line. My first production line was making the components for panel doors. So I think I had 12 people working for me. But, you know, in that production line, we could make the components for 3,000 doors a week with 12 people. And then there was another 12 or 18 people assembling them. But if the manager had told me we're going to stop the line for an hour and we're all going to talk about what it is that we've done, I would have, at that age, you know, when I was early 20s, I thought, well, this is a waste of time. But it wasn't until, you know, I met my mentor, if you like, who sort of enlightened me on some of the things in business. You know, if you can stop the toilet talk, which might be 180 people all talking for 15 minutes about what they think is going to happen, rather than being told what the work situation is. So whether it was good or bad news, we still communicated it, because not all news can be good. Sometimes it's going to be bad, and it's better that people know that. So good or bad, the news was always communicated to everybody, and it was always, the emphasis was on improving the communications that we had.
You spoke earlier about you had to make a whole site redundant, and obviously you're talking there about communicating the bad news. So how did you manage that situation with such a large team?
In that particular year, it was really hard. There was lots going on in my personal life as well, but I think it was the first thing, we made 20-25% of the workforce redundant. So the first thing was that we lost I can't remember if we lost our window or our door production, but it was decided, what they decided within the business was that there was an overcapacity of joinery manufacturers in the UK. So we did 180 million. Our biggest competitor was Bolton & Paul. They turned over about 110 million. We actually acquired them we acquired them 2 years after I closed my factory, I think. But it was sold on the basis there's an overcapacity, and what they decided was that they could swallow up my little production unit. First of all, they took the doors or the windows. I can't remember which way around it was. So we made 25% of the workforce redundant. So that was pain, but we followed the procedures. We were guided by HR, so we went into selection criterias and interviews with everybody and all that type of thing. And then when we closed the factory, there were rumours flying around, and the rumours were getting that one of the lads who worked for me at that time, I was the director general manager, so there was nobody in an office above me. The next person, my boss, was a guy called the group operational director, so he was based in Doncaster. I was based in Silverend, so 172 miles apart from each other. And there was a proposal to close our factory, so there were rumours flying around, and a guy who worked for me, he heard a rumour from a lorry driver that came from Doncaster, and he came in my office and he said, "I've heard this rumour, Dave, and the reason I'm telling you is because everything this lorry driver has told me in the past has always ended up to be true." And I said, well, I think they would have told me, and I haven't heard anything. So I phoned up my boss and said, "Look, this is the rumour, and it's getting disruptive. People are spending too much time talking about it." And he said, "Have you heard it from me?" I said, "No." He said, "Then it's business as usual, get on with it." So I decided to stop the factory that afternoon, got everybody in the canteen and told them what we were doing and that the rumours were a load of rubbish, and got lots of charts to show them, what we were selling and all that type of thing. And then about 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was asked if I could go to Doncaster the next day for a meeting at 9 o'clock. So having stopped my factory, told everybody things were fine, I then drove to Doncaster the following day to be told that there is a proposal to close the factory. So the group HR director proposed that he come down and tell everybody, which I was against, and I told him I didn't want to come down. So I did it. I stood up in front of the workforce and told them, and we got the works committee, we got the team leaders, I think we called them at the time. We got together and we came up with a proposal to counter the decision to close. So we came up with a very large cost-saving exercise that I can't remember what the payback was, but I can't understand now in my working life why that wouldn't have been accepted. But the site was 5 to 7 acres, prime building land. If you go there now, it's covered in houses. And that was rejected. So the proposal was to close the factory. At the time, the motto in the business, businesses go through these different phases, but the phase at the time, it was clear daylight. That was the logo of our business. And the clear daylight stood for, we wanted to create daylight between ourselves and our competitors in every respect, whether it was profit, performance, health and safety. Clear daylight should be between us and our competitors. So we had clear daylight notice boards around the factory. So I turned those all into job boards, and I went out and talked to companies that employed people similar to the people that I use. So at that time it was Bolton and Paul in Malden. It was Highfields in Heybridge. And I went out to different companies to say, look, I've got 30 wood machinists, I've got 35 carpenters, I've got this and that and whoever else. And some companies took on 5 people just because they would take them. And I think we ended up with about 95% of the workforce walking into another job with a redundancy package in their pocket. So,
that's amazing.
I put my effort into trying to help everybody find a job. So we wrote references, we wrote letters, created CVs, we did whatever we could do to find those people jobs. Well, I would say that was more driven by us at Essex than it was the group.
It comes back to the whole thing of giving people time, though, doesn't it? And
and some of it was difficult because there were key people that were offered a job, and it might have been the door closed in September, but they were offered a job and they needed to leave in July. But I knew it was going to affect what we had to do before we finished. But they were offered something, so you've got to let them go, haven't you? Yeah.
So been quite varied, and you did mention, you mentor people, and you didn't mention about someone that you looked up to that mentored you. Who have the influential people been in over your career and led you to where they are, and what did you learn from them?
I'd say the my main mentor is a guy called Ian Purkis, and Ian picked me up when I was 27, 28 ish. So at the time I was works manager, and I reported to a manager who was 60ish, I suppose. I was 28, and he was pretty old school, and he was not that he was always fearful that if he made a wrong decision, he would end up in a tribunal. So he would, we had a fairly large group of people that were disruptive, but he wouldn't actually do anything about it. And Ian was anxious for me to go into his position. And as I said earlier, Word documents, writing things was, well, back then would put me in a hot sweat, and I'd be very, very fearful about writing a letter. And Ian said to me that my verbal skills and blah, 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 blah were great. And this lady called Pam, I could basically either verbally tell her what I wanted her to produce, or I could scribble it down, and I didn't need to be worried about loads and loads of spelling mistakes, which is what would have been on the paper. But she would convert that into a document that I could send to whoever. It wouldn't matter. So there would be support and skills for that type of thing. And it was him who sent me to the ISM course. It was him who developed my people skills, because I was probably a little bit black and white until he came into my life, and we worked with ACAS to create the constitution, and I was part of that group. So he was my director general manager when I was 28. And then I think when I was about 31 or 32, he moved on to a bigger job in the group. So he moved to Doncaster, and then I moved into his chair. Yeah, but Ian Purkis was certainly one man who, in my business life, somebody who I've never, well, I have worked for, because I used to work for him at weekends, but another guy's called Trevor, and Trevor, completely different, but he probably learned me quite a lot about life, I suppose. But they would be my main two. When I worked for the bigger company, they used to, as part of your appraisal, they might assign you to somebody that they wanted you to be your mentor. And that person, I guess he's not around anymore, but it was a guy called Alan Runtley. But he was very old school, although he liked to think he had a new school hat on, he didn't. And he was my assigned mentor, but I would never ever really say that he helped me do what I do.
Interesting. So, obviously, quite a varied time, and kind of lots of knowledge gained. So, over that time, what would you say what does success mean to you? What idea of success has formed for you over that time?
I don't know. What is success? Is success the house you live in, the car you drive? Is success
quite personal to everybody, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I have had a successful career. Success to me, I suppose, is being valued. If I could probably list quite a lot of people that I think I've helped to achieve more in their life than they might have done if they hadn't have met me. So I think that would be. I'm not a. I suppose we'd all like to win the lottery, and we'd all like to live in a bigger house, and we'd all like to have a very nice villa in another country, which is quite warm, that we could go into in the winter. Well, I won't want to, as you know, Cross, because I'd miss my shooting then if I did that. But no, no, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I'm happy where I am and what I've done, and yeah, I think there are a number of people that have worked with me in my working life who are perhaps bigger in their jobs. There's got some. Sorry, sounded like there was.
You're right there.
It sounded like a dog was trying to get through the wall, but I've not got my dog in. Yeah, so I don't really know. I don't. I'm happy with where I am and what I do, and I don't want to be any bigger than I am. You know, my business is me and Corinne. If I'm honest, I do more than Corinne does, but Corinne's there in the background helping me to achieve what it is that I need to achieve. So, you know, she'll put all the numbers on the accounts, and she'll do those type of things, and she'll occasionally type stuff up for me or whatever. But I don't want to be any bigger than I am. I'm fine, and I feel as though I've got to where I am, and I've done certain things in my working life, and yeah, if I could go back and change, would I really have? I didn't have a choice. I closed the factory and I got rid of lots of people. If that factory hadn't closed, who knows, Bros? I'd have still probably been working there now.
I think that's the key thing, though, is you've said you're happy and you're happy with what you've achieved and what you've done. And I think overall that is success, is being happy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, what can happen outside of your working life is more important than what happens in your working life, in my opinion. They're both good.
Yeah. On that, do you think the support that you've had from Corinne, and do you think that's been pivotal to where you are now, and what you achieving what you would class as success?
Yeah, I mean, Corinne's always been 110% supportive of what I do, and you know, when you're in employment, you know, the job I was doing, I was paid very, very well, but she totally supported probably encouraged me to step away from that. So yeah, she's fully supportive of 99.9% of what I do.
There's always going to be that little bit.
Yeah. Going to the Masters for a weekend is the 0.1.
Oh yeah. Ganty Open.
Clashes with our wedding, which clashes with our wedding anniversary, but that's fine.
I had the Champions League Cup final clashing with my actual wedding, so I feel the pain there.
Yeah. Golfing weekend. I have asked a lot of questions, so I'm going to let Cheryl ask some of the questions from the next section.
Okay.
Cool. So, obviously, you've talked a lot about your business side of things and your career and your journey and everything. From a personal point of view, is there any like big things that stand out to you that have been pivotal moments for you, or anything that you've wanted to achieve personally that you've not yet achieved?
I honestly don't think that there is No, I mean, sort of I'm on rundown in terms of my working career now. You know, if I work I work part time really. You know, I probably work 2, sometimes 3 days a week. So I'm semi-retired, and to go from semi-retired to more time than that, I don't want to do it. I'm happy with what I do. I'm happy with what I earn, and the work, social, free time balance for me is good, and I'm fortunate that I'm in a position that I can do that. So I don't wish for any more than I do or have, and I don't have regrets. I sometimes think, what if? You know, I mean, the job that when I was at John Carr's, the job I would have aspired to doing would have been the group operational director's job. I would have liked 9 Snowlings reporting to me. And I think had I have stayed with that business, that might have been the job I ended up doing. But I don't regret the fact that I forced the redundancy situation at that company. They didn't want me to leave. I forced it, so that was my choice. But that company today, I think they've got 1 factory left, you know, so the 2 companies that, you know, my company and our biggest competitor that they bought, today they only have 1 factory, and they don't really produce anything in the UK. They import most of what they sell in this country from Europe. So what would I have been managing? Nothing really.
Yeah. And it's there, as you look forward to obviously semi-retirement and potentially fully retirement, are there things that you want to do personally that you've been putting off in your career, or things that you've always said, oh, I can do that when I retire? Or have you been able to do those things throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, I love fishing. I love shooting. I enjoy playing golf. So I suppose I love outside things. Yeah, and if I had more time, and I'm fortunate in that my wife comes with me when I go shooting 9 times out of 10, and she enjoys being with my friends as much as I do. She enjoys outside life. When I used to go trout fishing, she quite often would come with me and sit on the bank and read a book or whatever, you know. Not interested in catching a fish. She's not interested in firing a gun, but I'm fortunate in that we enjoy spending time together, I suppose. You know, I
Sorry.
live in a nice part of Suffolk, and I've always, you know, I've at 21 I had an allotment. I bought my first house when I was 21, and I had an allotment which was 8 rod, which is 52 by 26, so it's a fair bit of ground. And over my life, I've had a vegetable plot at my mother-in-law's house, but I never really had a proper veggie plot in my back garden. But where I live now, you know, I bought a little piece of land when we bought this house, and I've turned it into a sort of almost a little bit sort of self-sufficient from perhaps April through till September. So pretty much everything that we put on the table, vegetable-wise or salad, I grow. And I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. You know, 2 years ago we got our first little flock of 5 hens. So all the eggs that we were eating came from our chickens, all the veg, and when we have an over development of lettuces, chickens get the lettuces. You know, so yeah, I can't. No, I'm pretty happy with my lot. I'm okay.
Oh, that sounds lovely. How long have you been married for? Sorry, I love the fact that you said you and your wife love spending time together. So how long have you been married?
27 years.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, 27.
Oh, I loved what you said about your wife, because that's not the norm. People are always moaning about their other halves. So that's why I kind of just picked up on that so much.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's I don't know, quite fortunate. I mean, a lot of my a lot of my mates, they don't have the same relationships with their wives, but I'm just fortunate. Yeah, no, very very good, very very supportive, and I like to think I try to be the same back. You know.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
lovely. Have you found that your relationships changed at all? You mentioned that your wife supports you in the business. So has your relationship changed much where you have become like that working part of your relationship as well, or have you found it's got closer or
I
anything?
think Corinne understands more about what it is that I do because, I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you can be man and wife for 27 years and you never really see what your husband does because you never go to his place of work. He never sees what you can do because he doesn't go to your place of work. You talk about it, you know, you might say, oh, I've done this great deal, or we've bought this wonderful machine, or we've now got this software system, or whatever it might be, but you don't fully understand it unless you do it. But I suppose in the last 12 years, because I write, you know, I'll write up a report in Snowling language, which is about a business and where I feel they could do better. So I might do a 4 or 5 page document, and then Corinne will proofread it for me, and her command of the English language in terms of writing is far better than mine. So she will, and when she gets to a bit that she doesn't quite understand, because I've got some technical stuff in there, she'll say, just explain what that means to me. And I think Corinne has a better understanding of what I do now as a job, working for myself, because she's more involved with it than ever she did before I went alone. You know. Yeah. So I think she has a better understanding and appreciation of what I do. And quite often I'll call, you know, because before the pandemic, we never really did a lot of this type of thing, did we? And since the pandemic, this has become not the norm, but it is more normal. And I've just started doing some work for a company in Spain. And one of the girls that I work with in Spain is called Loreto. And it's quite nice because if I'd been working for them direct, I went out to Barcelona, met the people, went to the factory, looked at what it is that we're going to do, come up with an action plan, and Corin would never have met them. But I have Google videos with Loreto, and the first time she called me, I said, Loreto, could you just hold on a minute? I'd just like to introduce you to my wife. And I called Corin in, and then, you know, Corin said hello and blah, 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 blah. And it's quite nice because when you're working, you might take on somebody new in your office, but your husband never gets to meet them, but all they do is hear of the name, but they never know the person. So yeah, that's quite nice. You might have met somebody at a Christmas party or a social that you do, you know, or a team building exercise if you invite other halves. But no, I think she's got to have a better understanding of what it is that I do. Yeah,
Yeah, and
quite
you're right
often,
there actually, because I actually find that because my team's all remote, and yeah, we don't have that daily interaction in an office or anything, but we do have all that extra interaction where their husbands will jump on the call and say hi and things like that. So you can build the relationship in other ways, then, can't you? And
that's right.
it is nice.
Yeah, and like, I've got 2 dogs,
Yes.
and another company I do work for, which is Axis, which is more of I'd say my banker job. You know, you can be sitting here, and Maggie, my little cocker, she'll come in. I go, come on up here, you know, and she'll be sitting there looking at the screen. And suddenly, you know, it's just
Yeah,
yeah,
It's a different way of doing exactly what you said you used to do when you worked in the factory, where every morning you go and say hello to everyone, and
that's
after every
right.
lunch. It's just
Yeah,
a different way of being able to do that, isn't it?
yeah.
So
And I think Corinne would also say that her skills have developed because she's got more involved in spreadsheets, she's got more involved in Word documents, and she's never ever been on a course, but we kind of work together at the IT side of life all of a sudden, you know, which is, you can't just say to, you know, Mike Harris, who used to be at Mumford and Wood, my computer's not working anymore. We've now got to do it ourselves, you know. Yeah. And it's good for grey matter. It keeps you thinking, and yeah. So I try and deal with as much of that type of thing as I can myself without having to go to somebody else.
It's growing together, isn't it? Which is important, even both as a couple, and also if you run a team, it's that everyone grows and goes on the same journey together, rather than just dictating from the front and letting the rest drag from behind. It's the same.
Again, and it's probably another unexpected thing from business, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. But Corinne's very people orientated as well. I mean, when I was working, in a paid job, Corinne would always, she's not the boss's wife. Well, she is the boss's wife, but she would always go and talk to everybody. And, her people skills are a lot better than mine. But she's just a very caring person, and she would always go out of her way to make sure she spoke to everybody that she could speak to at any function that we went to. And even nowadays, I might decide to go to Birmingham NEC to a trade show of some description, but I take Corinne with me, and okay, Corinne's not going to understand the technical detail of some of the machines that I might talk to somebody about, but she's there and she'll say hello and she'll get involved, and it's quite nice to do that.
Oh, it definitely does. You've talked a lot today about mentoring people and helping people and everything. So I just wondered if you had one piece of advice that you'd give to somebody who is just starting out, either in their career or in their business owner journey. What would you say is your top tip for those people?
My top tip for somebody who's just starting out: listen and think about what it is that you're told, and think about that before you give an answer on anything that goes back. Just be a good listener. Don't be a reactor. I think sometimes, I said it to my kids as well, somebody can say something to provoke you, and then you might regret saying something. So just take time in analysing in your head what it is that they've said before you give a response. But none of my kids listen to me, so probably bad advice.
Yeah, I think they do listen to you.
No, I think that would be my advice: is listen. And just because you've got the boss hat on, it doesn't mean to say that you are the person who makes all the decisions. Some of the best decisions, or most of the best ideas, come from the people who work for you, because they do the job.
Love that. I'm writing that down because that is such a good piece of advice.
That's good though. That's what we want, isn't it? We want the whole idea behind the podcast is sharing ideas and sharing different ways that things are done, so we can all learn and all grow together. It's what the whole idea behind it.
You kind of know though when you go into a business and the person who owns the business says, "We're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this," you kind of know that business is not really perhaps going to do as well as it might do. It's the businesses where they say, right, we're going to get together and we're going to talk to the people who do the job and understand what it is that they do, get their ideas, and then move forward. It's those type of businesses. If you can get that type of approach, the business that I referred to earlier on, I'm not going to mention their name, but the business that I worked with who do really, really well, they've gone from a shanty sort of existence in lots of different buildings. What they had to do to get a product out was ridiculous. They're now in a nice new factory which they've bought. It's laid out really well because I helped them. They've got great machinery. They put a mezzanine floor in there, but they haven't devoted that to production. What they've done is they've built a gym, and they've got a pool table, and they've got a nice canteen area. So their workforce go in the morning and they work out in the gym area on weights and running and do whatever else. And at the end of the day, they might do the same. I mean, I might get a bit against it because they're starting off tired, and I think they should work first and then do the gym at the end. But it's the value that the employees get from that, and they're going to get far more out of those people than somebody who just walks into a factory, waits for the siren to go at 7 o'clock, and then off they go. Siren goes at 4. They chuck the bag over the shoulder and walk out.
Yeah,
you know, they've got two guys who own the business, doing weights and whatever else they're doing in the mornings, and their workforce are, some of them are doing it, some of them don't. It's up to them.
Yeah, and that value piece is important, isn't it? Because it's important if you want people to be productive, they need to feel valued.
Yeah, and they've also got like a brainstorming board as well. It's a whiteboard, but they have stick-it notes, and anybody who has an idea, you just slap the stick-it note on the board with your idea, and it you know, it's not that you walk in there at 7 o'clock in the morning, you see all these stick-it notes from 5 weeks ago. You know, that's one way of telling whether or not a business is actually communicating with its workforce well. Go and look at their notice board. If you've got loads of notices on the notice board with dates that are like 5 years old, then in my opinion, they're not committed to good communications. You know, the notice board is as important as me telling you today, this is what we produced yesterday, or tomorrow telling what we produced the day before. You know, it's all part of what you do.
Great, thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. Should we move on to the closer question? I'll let you ask it, Dan.
If you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
That's another sort of crazy-ish question, isn't it? If I wasn't doing
I've been called some amazing things in this one.
If I wasn't doing what I'm doing today, what would I be doing?
Yeah. What would you want to do?
What would I want to do?
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd want to do anything differently from what I do today, to be honest. I mean, if you said, well, what's your dream job? You know, when I was 16 and I went to John Carr's, I did not want that job. You know, I was 16. I went for 7 or 8 interviews. I want to be a carpenter. I had no idea there was a thing called a wood machinist. I want to be a chippy. And I walked into John Carr's, and the manager showed me around the factory, and he said, you can start on Monday, and you're going to be a wood machinist apprentice. You know, and when we went back to the office, I actually said to him, with all due respect, I hear what you're saying, but I wanted to be a joiner. And he looked at me, and he was from Yorkshire, and he said, you don't want to be a joiner, son. That's a woman's job. Now, that was in 1975, so he could say that then. But I didn't want to be that. And he said, when do you leave school? And I said, next Wednesday. He said, you can start next Thursday. And I did everything that I could to try and find another job. After I started there on the Thursday, I got offered 3 other jobs. But because I'd started there, I'm the type of person, if I'm committed to it, I do it. But what I really wanted to do, Pros, before I went and worked at John Carr's, if I could have had my dream job, my dad was a farm worker, and I spent my childhood and my teenage years working on the farm. You know, so when I was 13, I started driving a tractor with a trailer, following the combine around the field. So 13, 14 and 15, that's what I did in my school summer holidays. My mates were all doing stuff. I was working on the farm. Not because my dad told me I had to, it's because I wanted to. So that would have been my dream job. And I suppose if you said, well, what would you really like to do? I'd like to perhaps do some of the things what Ben Fogle goes and sees. Some of those to me are amazing.
But the off the grid things.
Yeah. I kind of, those type of things appeal to me, but they are not conducive to happy family life, because how can you go and live in the forest in Canada and only get there by helicopter, and what do you do with your kids? You know, that's not something I want to do either. But if I could have my dream, yeah, I'd quite like to be off grid, and I'd like to be somewhere where I could develop more of what I do here with my 19 raised beds and my greenhouse and my chickens and all that sort of stuff. I suppose I'd like to be more self-sufficient, I suppose.
Amazing.
It's nothing that I want to do. I don't want to do that, but that would probably be a dream.
No. I get that.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and your expertise on that.
Thank you. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm sure there's lots of people that will learn a lot from this. So yeah, thank you very much.
Good. Well, thank you.
Don't laugh. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please like and subscribe, and we'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review or drop us a DM on our Insta @Found to Life Podcast.
See you in the next episode.